Hey gang, what's going on? 1:30 Eastern. Just leaving Kayla over here. She's going one way, I'm going the other. We are leaving Beaufort Memorial Hospital in South Carolina. Phenomenal call, and I think if you ask Kayla, we probably went through the entire Integrity Selling Aid Inc. Acronym. We never been to the hospital. It's an independent. Walked in the front door, walked down to the basement. We passed by. What was that? Materials management. I says, listen, let's go right by there. You know, we might get pinched. So we were looking for Biomed. We were looking for Central Supply to really just get a feel for, hey, what do you guys use over here? So we walked into Central Supply, and we see this one fella, and we start speaking to him about wound vacs. You know, let him know that one of our companies does a lot of the external wound vacs going home. We're also the largest breast pump company in the world. You probably use our breast pumps over here in Medela. He says, oh yeah. And then we says, but we have some questions on your in-house wound vacs. Does that ring a bell, wound vacs? And he said, oh, I know who you want to talk to. So while he's going over around the corner to speak to this fella, this gal, Deanna, comes over, and she says, hey, I can probably help you. I'm like, oh, Deanna. And I actually called her Donna. I swear to God, that's what her name tag looked like. But Deanna says, we explain, who we were again. And she says, oh, let me bring you over here. So she brings us around the corner, and she brings us around to a stainless steel table. It's got the KCI Ready Care system on there for when people are going home. FYI, Kayla, that kind of tells me anytime you see a Ready Care system that there's not a local KCI rep that can bring them pumps like an Activac quickly for discharge. And Chris will probably second that, I would imagine. And then she says, yeah, we use these pumps. She reaches down to the bottom shelf and grabs out a Vac Alta. Okay. All right. So you guys are at KCI house. So then, long story short, this guy, Philip Mock comes out, and white-haired fella, older gentleman, comes out, very personable. And he says, hey, come on in my office. And, I says, oh, geez, we don't have an appointment. I don't want to impose. And he's, oh, come on in. So we go in, we sit down, and just bringing you through the whole 8 Inc. scenario, approach. We interviewed, we spoke about who we were after we actually had a very lengthy approach step. He is obviously a talker. I think Kayla might be nodding her head, and we broke some stones there. We were in the approach stage for probably 15 good minutes, man. Just a really nice fella down here in Beaufort, South Carolina. So he's familiar with wound vacs. He knows what they use. And, we started to, doing that interview, talking to him about, tell me about what you have there. And before we even really got to start with telling him about MedAxis, right? I mean, we told him who we were. We were a wound vac company, right? You introduce yourself, right? But during that interview process, we asked him, tell us about what's going on over here. Tell us about the KCI Solventum. He goes, yeah, I actually just sat down with them yesterday. And long story short, the hospital was just in the black last year. But other than, if it weren't for investments and investors in the hospital, they would have been in the red. And really what he said is they'd like their operational, they'd like their operations to really, revenues, to really take care of their cost. So without the investors and the investments, being in the red is not good, right? So he's turning over every stone. And again, I guess what I would say to Kayla and I spoke, what I would say to Chris and what I would say to Cindy, what I would say to anyone, it's the beginning of the year. Everyone is taking a look at how they finished last year, no different than we would at February during our national sales meeting. Everyone's taking a look at where they finished, where the revenues fell, where, red or black, where the operational costs are, and they're taking a look at expenditures. And most hospitals nowadays are not rich places. They're not rolling in the dough. So most places right now are looking for areas to save money. I mean, this is a good time in quarter one to get out there and go see people. This is what you do in quarter one, okay? So he says, yeah, I just sat down with Solventum, and actually I just sat down with Smith & Nephew, and they're putting together a proposal for me. I'm like, oh my God, this is a great time. So nice little interview stage there. We rolled into the demonstrate, and he says, I don't know anything about your product, and so we spoke about the Liberty devices and our long history being part of Medela, 60 years, medical vacuum technology. I says, not for nothing, but you looked at Smith & Nephew. I says, I was at Smith & Nephew for 7 years. I was there in 2009 when KCI came off patent and they launched the the Blue Sky pump. He says, oh my God, I was up in Macon, Georgia. I remember that device. I had a Smith & Nephew rep named Kathy, whatever her name was. And I says, yeah. He says, not for nothing, but that was actually a Medela device. Can you believe it? So it was great conversation. We moved through the rest of the process, but he says, yeah, I mean, I can't promise you anything, but I would definitely like to entertain a proposal from you. Next steps would be, let's take a look at the finances, the proposal. Let's see how the costs shake out versus the KCI. And he said, if that passes muster, the next stage would obviously be a small trial, and we'll go from there. So it was a great conversation. It's typically, I've gone into calls like that. Sometimes you just got to catch people on the right day. But again, if we're out there making the calls, calling on the Central Supply to get some information, calling on Biomed to get some information. While Kayla was over at MUSC this morning, I was over at East Cooper this morning, called on Biomed and what have you, got a lot of information, right? But if you're out there calling on those folks and then calling like this fella, Philip Mock over in supply chain, he brought us in purchasing, and then calling on the folks in wound care, seeing if they can give you some information. We called on the wound center this morning over at the MUSC while we were there. If we're making the calls, it's typically going to happen. I often say this, and I tell this to my boys, and I'm not trying to preach, but I often say that the harder I work, the luckier I seem to be, So again, making the calls, and that's what it's all about. So I just got a text from Kayla, and she says, hey, I think he already sent over the usage. The funny thing is that we didn't go in there with a preset call plan. See, this is the thing about call plans, right? You may not always have a call plan, even though Kayla had her notebook ready. Kayla takes, like Chris, copious notes. It's phenomenal. So if anyone needs any sales call notes, Kayla has them, okay? But lo and behold, I forgot to ask about Pravina. And lo and behold, as we're leaving his office and we're ending our call, and then Kayla and I were going to cross the hall and have lunch in the cafeteria, I look up at the wall up there and I go, hey, you guys use the Pravina. I saw all the purple boxes. He goes, yeah. He says, you guys have those too? I says, yes, we have a comparable. I says, Philip, if you would, please include that usage so that we can do a crosswalk for you. So he pledged that he would. I found that interesting. I found that interesting that if he already spoke to Smith & Nephew and they were in his office, when they were walking out the door, why would the rep not ask about the Pravina? So that leads me to believe that maybe the Smith & Nephew rep was doing this on the phone or on email. He or she reached out. They never stepped foot in the office. I don't know what's going on there, but evidently, it doesn't sound like Smith & Nephew brought up any of the Pico. So very interesting. Anyway, that's the call for the day. It was a great call. I'm almost at 10 minutes, and thanks to Kayla for letting me pal around with her here on Thursday in Beaufort, South Carolina. All right, bye-bye.